Tonight, we begin not with a philosopher or a king, but with something far more dangerous and complicated. Dating in the Middle Ages. Because believe it or not, finding love in a time of plagues, dowries, and chaperones was somehow even more awkward than texting someone, "What you doing?" at 2 a.m. From courtly love songs to marriage by livestock negotiation, medieval romance was less about butterflies and more about land rights. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to fall in love when you couldn't speak to your crush without a chaperone? When a single glance across the market was considered flirtation, and a love letter could get you excommunicated? When your parents were already negotiating your marriage before you'd even held hands? What did it mean to be romantic in a world where love was optional and a dowry of geese was considered genuinely thoughtful? Tonight, we step into the candlelit halls and muddy village greens of the Middle Ages to discover how people found, or were forced into, love. If you enjoy these quiet journeys into history's strangest customs, take a moment to subscribe to Little Historical. And let me know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, perhaps a blanket, and let us begin. So, you think someone's cute? Maybe it's the way they balance a basket of onions on their head. Maybe it's the confident way they beat mud off a rug. Your medieval heart skips a beat. But steady yourself, because in this world, romance doesn't bloom without a balance sheet. Before you even think about courtship, you'd better ask, what do I bring to the table? And if your answer is a charming personality, you might want to sit down. If you're a young man, you'll need land, or livestock, or tools, or a roof that doesn't leak too much. Love letters are nice, but nothing says husband material like 2 healthy oxen and a roof that can survive a mild storm. If your father has already promised the best goat to your brother, well, you might want to consider the priesthood. If you're a young woman, your family needs a dowry. That could be coin, clothing, or a suspiciously generous number of geese. Doesn't matter how witty you are. If your family can't pay up, you're likely to spend a long time perfecting your embroidery alone. Now, let's say you actually like someone who makes your calloused heart flutter. You lock eyes at the well. There's a spark. It's romantic. It's poetic. It's completely irrelevant, because unless your families are on equal financial footing, you might as well fall in love with a cloud. If you're noble, it gets worse. Your hand in marriage is tied to land, borders, and political favors. You're not just a person. You're a walking treaty. Congratulations. Even peasants aren't safe. Marriage is practical. You don't marry for butterflies. You marry because your pig pen borders someone else's wheat field. You dream of passion. You settle for irrigation rights. And yet you try. Maybe you offer a small gift, a carved spoon, a handful of berries, or your finest slightly cracked mug. Maybe they smile. Maybe they don't. But the truth remains, in medieval dating, economics is the flirting, and love is just a bonus you hope your spouse develops eventually. There is a strange intimacy in this transaction. A young woman's father weighing her worth in silver, a young man counting his cattle under his breath. The two families circle each other like cautious merchants, their eyes not on the couple but on the land, the livestock, the legal boundaries. Sometimes, in the quiet after the bargaining, the boy and girl are left alone for a moment, a chaperone pretending to look the other way. A hand might brush against a sleeve. A whisper might escape. But the deal is already sealed. Their hearts are merely an afterthought. And as the evening closes and the contracts are signed, they steal one last glance. Not of love, perhaps, but of curiosity. Who is this stranger I will share my bread with? Will they be kind? Will they be gentle? The questions linger in the smoky air, unanswered. And the dowry chest sits in the corner, heavy with linen and expectation. But once the marriage is arranged, there is still the matter of wooing, of sending tokens, of dancing at festivals, of writing letters that might be intercepted by a disapproving priest. That, dear listener, is where our story turns next. But once the marriage is arranged, there is still the matter of wooing, of sending tokens, of dancing at festivals, of writing letters that might be intercepted by a disapproving priest. That, dear listener, is where our story turns next. So, let's say you're not a peasant worrying about pigs or a noble dealing with treaties. Let's say you're a knight. Shiny armor, big horse, questionable poetry skills. What's your love life like? Welcome to the strange and emotionally exhausting world of courtly love. Now, this isn't dating. This is performance art. Courtly love was a noble pastime, part flirting, part spiritual suffering, and entirely impractical. You, the brave knight, choose a noble lady, usually one who's already married, and vow to adore her from afar. Not physically, of course. That would ruin everything. No, you're supposed to suffer elegantly. You might compose a few tortured verses about her silver laugh, or how her hair burns like the sun, which in medieval terms means she has hair and didn't insult your family. You wear her colors at tournaments. You pine, you sigh. You occasionally joust someone just because he glanced at her too long. The lady's role? She's supposed to pretend this is all very flattering, while maintaining a level of icy detachment that would terrify a glacier. She may respond with a letter, a token, maybe a ribbon, but mostly she'll just be mysterious and unattainable, which is the entire point. The emotions are high. The actual contact minimal. At best, you might get a nod from across the hall or a finger brushed against your gauntlet during a feast. Anything more, and suddenly it's not courtly love. It's a scandal, or worse, adultery. And no one wants that, at least not officially. This entire setup worked best when everyone involved agreed it was mostly pretend. It was a way to express longing, devotion, and creative angst, all without disrupting the social order. A medieval venting mechanism, if you will. Was it dramatic? Absolutely. Did it involve more poetry than practicality? Constantly. But for a night stuck between battles and boredom, courtly love gave you something to write about, and someone to write for. Just don't expect a happy ending, or a kiss, or even eye contact. There is a strange, aching tension in this arrangement, a longing that can never be fulfilled, a desire that must remain unconsummated. The knight's heart burns, but he cannot touch. The lady's gaze lingers, but she cannot reach out. In the hush of a moonlit courtyard, a glove changes hands, and for a moment, their fingers almost meet. Then a servant coughs, and the spell breaks. He rides away with her ribbon tied to his lance, and she watches from a window, her hand pressed to the cold stone. It is not love. It is the idea of love, polished, distant, and safe. And for a society that feared passion more than plague, that was enough. But for those who wanted more than poetry and pins, there were other ways to connect. Festivals, for instance, offered rare chances for actual touch. And that, dear listener, is where our journey continues. But for those who wanted more than poetry and pins, there were other ways to connect. Festivals, for instance, offered rare chances for actual touch. And that, dear listener, is where our journey continues. Finally, a break. A feast day, a harvest festival, a maypole dance. In short, a rare moment when your life isn't just work, prayer, and pretending you're not interested in the blacksmith's daughter. Today, you're allowed to flirt, sort of. As long as no one sees, or everyone sees but pretends not to. Welcome to medieval festivals, where romance blooms under the watchful eyes of everyone you've ever met, and 3 chickens. Festivals were one of the few socially approved moments when men and women could mingle, laugh, and, dare we say, make eye contact. There's music, there's ale, there's someone wearing a flower crown with dangerous confidence. You've never seen so many people not pretending to be miserable. If you're a peasant, you might try to impress your crush by winning the sack race, catching a greased pig, or juggling 3 stale rolls of bread. Nothing says I'm available like falling off a hay bale with dignity. Dancing was your best shot at actual physical contact. The rules were rigid, but a well-timed spin or a not-quite-accidental hand graze could say more than any poem. The maypole dance, for example, was basically a giant excuse for coordinated flotation wrapped in ribbons and plausible deniability. And if you're noble, your version of flirting at a festival involved less hay and more poetry. You might compose a verse on the spot, compare your lady's eyes to twin candles or other glowing things, and offer a trinket, hopefully not one that was clearly made by your servant 5 minutes earlier. Food helped, too. Offer your beloved a meat pie or share a honey cake. If they accept it with a smile, you're doing well. If they hand it to their dog, start over with someone else. But remember, everything you do, someone is watching. a parent, a priest, a bard with a big mouth. One misstep, and your flirty smile becomes a youthful indiscretion discussed at church for the next 6 weeks. Still, for a few hours, you can pretend. Pretend you're in a world where love isn't a transaction, where laughter isn't suspicious, and where dancing in public doesn't end in penance. And if you're brave enough, or foolish enough, you might even write a letter. A secret love letter, slipped under a door or handed to a bribed servant. The words are poetry, of course, nothing so crude as "I miss you." You write of the moon, of a wounded stag, of a rose crushed beneath a careless foot. If the letter is discovered, you can claim it was a theological exercise. But if it reaches its intended hands, and if they smile, then the risk was worth it. Then the festival ends, the ale runs dry, and the chaperones return. But the memory of a hand held for 2 seconds behind a hay bale, that lasts through the winter. And for those who dared not dance or write, there was always the quiet rebellion of a shared glance across the chapel. That, dear listener, is where the most forbidden love of all took root, behind monastery walls. And for those who dared not dance or write, there was always the quiet rebellion of a shared glance across the chapel. That, dear listener, is where the most forbidden love of all took root, behind monastery walls. So, you didn't go the marriage route. Maybe you were the second son, or your dowry was suspiciously small, or you just really like chanting. Either way, you've joined a monastery or convent. You've taken a vow of poverty, chastity, and an aggressive disinterest in romance. And yet, here you are in a stone cloister surrounded by silence, candle smoke, and Brother Anselm's unexpectedly soulful eyes. Yes, even behind monastery walls, forbidden love found a way. Falling in love in a religious order was deeply discouraged. You might get whipped, exiled, or lectured by someone with a Latin name. You've sworn to give your heart entirely to God. But hearts are unruly, and sometimes prayers start sounding a lot like love poems. Maybe it starts with innocent tasks, passing bread in the refectory, whispering during vespers, laughing too hard when someone drops a hymnal. Before you know it, you're tucking extra cheese into Sister Beatrice's satchel. Some monks and nuns wrote passionate letters, disguised, of course, as theological musings. Your soul is a shining light in the darkness of my contemplation sounds holy, unless you read between the lines. Scandals followed. Secret meetings in the herb garden, midnight confessions that weren't strictly sacramental. The punishment was harsh, exile, public penance, or reassignment to a far-off abbey. Still, not all stories ended in disgrace. Some lovers escaped. A few even married after being defrocked. Most returned to their cloisters, red-faced and redevoted, swearing it was all a theological debate. But for those who left, or never entered, there was another path, second chances. Let's say your spouse dies. Now you're widowed. And suddenly the medieval dating pool opens back up. Being a widow was oddly liberating. Managing land, making decisions, even speaking in public without being shushed. And if you were youngish and still had teeth, you could remarry, quickly. A widow with land was a walking treasure chest. Suitors appeared with alarming speed, some sincere, others just enthusiastic about your dairy cows. If you're a man and recently widowed, society pushes you back into marriage. Who else will raise the 11 children? Romance in second marriages could be surprisingly sweet. This time, you're older, wiser. You're choosing someone to survive with, maybe even someone you like. Of course, there were rules. The church frowned on remarriage that happened too quickly. Your spouse isn't cold yet quickly. Widows had to negotiate over dowries and inheritance. Nothing says romantic second chance like arguing over who keeps the butter churn. But second marriages were common, even expected. Life was short. Winters were long. And yes, love was part of it. Not the swooning, sonnet-writing kind, but the quiet kind, based on shared stories and mutual respect. So you light the fire, pour the soup, and try again. Not because it's perfect, but because it's human. And in the end, whether in a castle, a cottage, or a cloister, love found a way, awkward, stubborn, and always under someone's watchful eye.